Commerce Alive Today presents
Luby's Cafeteria. Luby's roots run through America's political, social, and economic history, beginning with the first unit and extending through every successive decade of the 20th century. Although Luby's was incorporated in 1959, the company's history was planted in 1909 when clothes merchant Harry Luby made a business trip from his home in Springfield, Missouri, to Chicago, Illinois. Luby was captivated by a new type of restaurant where patrons picked the food items they wanted from a counter and carried their own trays to dining tables. Luby immediately saw that the Chicago restaurant was employing the then-emerging concepts of mass production and assembly lines in the restaurant business. 2 years later, Luby opened a similar operation in Springfield, Missouri. From a 12-foot counter he built himself, Luby dished out freshly prepared food at reasonable prices. 1 year later in 1912, Luby opened a second cafeteria in Springfield. From Missouri to Oklahoma to Texas, Luby opened one cafeteria after another over the next 10 years. In stepping stone fashion, Luby would sell outright or retain a partial interest in a unit before moving southward to establish his next eatery. In 1927, the 39-year-old Harry Luby had made enough money to retire in San Antonio, where he oversaw his investments in 7 cafeterias in Texas and 1 in Kansas. Amiable and generous, Harry Luby had operated his restaurants on some very simple concepts: good food at reasonable prices for the customers and a generous portion of profits for the managers. Share the work, share the risks, share the profits was a guiding principle for Luby. Thus, as an investor in 8 cafeterias, Luby gave 40% of profits to the unit managers, an unusually large percentage at the time as well as in the years that followed. Harry's son Robert Luby grew up in the restaurant business, playing after school in cafeteria basements as a young child and working in cafeterias cleaning grease traps as a teenager. After graduating from college, Bob Luby and his cousin Earl Luby set their entrepreneurial sights on San Francisco, where they opened a cafeteria which failed to produce the Texas-sized profits his father's restaurants generated. Bob returned to Texas undeterred in his goal to establish and run a successful cafeteria. That goal was reached with a cafeteria in Dallas on Live Oak Street. Luby next enlisted his aunt, uncle, and brother-in-law George H. Wenglain to invest in, establish, and operate a cafeteria in El Paso, Texas. While Bob Luby's cafeterias prospered during the 1930s, business was bleak for others. Homeless, hungry people often visited Luby's for sustenance. During the Depression, the cafeterias associated with Harry and Bob Luby served needy people from the food left over at closing time. World War II and its wake profoundly altered America, sparking social changes and robust economic growth. Forced to sell his Dallas cafeteria when he enlisted in the Army Air Corps, Luby's thoughts returned to the cafeteria business even while serving as an intelligence officer. The contacts he made while serving his country constituted the foundation of a management team for the cafeteria chain to come. In 1946, Bob Luby hung up his military uniform and began plans with his cousin, Charles R. Johnston, to establish a cafeteria for the post-war era. In the decade following the war, household incomes would rise, families would move from cities to suburbs, and lifestyles calling for convenient products and services would reshape the fabric of American life. Amid such awesome change, Americans also would seek the threads of the past. In 1947, Luby and Johnston recognized the promise of these post-war stirrings and opened a cafeteria with capacity to seat 180 people. Located in downtown San Antonio, the restaurant was an immediate success thanks to returning servicemen in the area and to the post-war housing shortage which had forced many people to live in downtown hotels. Nearby movie theaters provided brisk business in the evening. The cafeteria was managed by Norwood W. Jones, a fellow officer of Luby's while stationed at Santa Ana Army Air Base. Luby and Johnston's next restaurant was located in the growing and affluent San Antonio suburb of Alamo Heights. Brother-in-law Wenglain was persuaded to co-manage the cafeteria with John Lee, a pre-war Luby's associate. The Alamo Heights cafeteria served as a model for future Luby's units. From the front seat of a sporty Studebaker serving as their office, the two entrepreneurs traveled the Lone Star State in search of new locations. Luby and Johnston were careful to open new cafeterias only when they had managers to operate the units according to the standards Harry Luby had pioneered. By 1958, Luby and Johnston had opened 11 cafeterias, each of which had a different configuration of investors. In order to build and operate new Luby's cafeterias, the investors formed a new corporation, Cafeterias Incorporated, on February 4, 1959. The pre-existing cafeterias were not affected by the new structure because those units provided the cash to help the investors finance the new corporation. The new corporation launched its first cafeteria in March 1960 in a strip shopping center in Corpus Christi, and 2 others followed within 60 days. Although in the black, the 3 units were not generating the profits normally associated with Luby's cafeterias. Downtown locations proved to be a problem, while an experiment to serve breakfast was a mild failure. Luby's hit pay dirt with its 4th cafeteria located in a far north San Antonio suburb in a retail development called North Star Mall. Bob Luby recalled, "Some people thought we had lost our minds because it was so far out that the city buses didn't serve the mall adequately. We actually had to subsidize the bus service in order to get our employees to work." But the fast-growing affluent suburbs surrounding the mall would fill the 4th corporate Luby's restaurant with patrons and provide profits to build more cafeterias. With Bob Luby as president and Charles Johnston as executive vice president, Luby's entered the Houston market in 1965 with an upscale cafeteria which offered an expanded menu and more expensive food items. Operating under the Romano name, the cafeteria quickly became a huge moneymaker. The modern structure with its rich decor served as a model for revamping efforts at existing Luby's and proved a market existed for cafeterias with a very modern style and design. Luby's growth in the Houston market was propelled, in part, by the nation's space program, initiated in the early 1960s, with its mission control headquarters in the area. In subsequent years, the oil industry and its attendant financiers in the banking and financial services industries would fuel the economy further. The corporation forged a link with the original Luby's cafeterias in 1969 when it agreed to manage those units for the next 15 years, bringing the number of corporate managed units to 26, of which 17 were company-owned. Luby and Johnston passed their executive management reins to George Wenglane and to Norwood Jones, respectively, in 1971. Luby, who remained chairman of the board, recalled the reason for stepping aside at age 61. "I had run the company with Charles since the beginning. Before we started selling stock to the public, I wanted to be darn sure the company could operate without me as president. So, Charles and I stepped down earlier than we had to." In January 1972, the company's stock was offered to the public in the over-the-counter market. The company continued to expand into new markets such as Dallas and to strengthen its internal operations, creating the new corporate position of area manager to oversee existing units and to launch new ones in a specific market. The Yom Kippur War in October 1973 ushered in an era in which the Texas economy would be inexorably tied to Middle Eastern oil and the volatile political situation in that part of the world. The war created gasoline shortages in the United States but no shortages of customers at Luby's, which offered a reasonably priced, convenient suburban alternative to consumers whose pocketbooks were pinched by higher gas prices and whose auto travel was circumscribed by scarce fuel. High oil prices soon began to work to Luby's advantage as energy exploration and development in Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana injected billions of dollars into the region's economy. With more cafeterias opening to meet the demand, Luby's created a formal training program to ensure that each new cafeteria would have adequate managerial staffers who were service-oriented to their customers, sensitive to their employees, and cost-conscious to the bottom line. The Luby Story, a history of the company published in 1988, explained that trainees were schooled in the theory and practice of running a cafeteria. The bootcamp-style training taught the recruits the intricacies of butchering a side of beef, baking a lemon meringue pie, and mopping the floor, as well as how to clean the restaurant equipment and replenish the cafeteria's serving line. Trainees also learned to show respect to all Luby's employees. In the kitchen, the young recruit is taught to show deference to his instructors, the fry cook, the baker, the butcher, and the salad maker. Clearly, the young college graduate is the disciple and the veteran cook his master, the corporate history stated. The deference and respect have resulted in a stable workforce at the individual Luby's cafeterias. Luby's has recorded one of the lowest turnovers of support staff in the restaurant industry. That low turnover has translated into experienced and consistent service for the customers and minimal training costs for the individual units. After graduation, the prospective managers spend 7 to 10 years of additional training in individual cafeterias, moving from assistant manager to associate manager to manager, and from manager of a small unit to manager of larger and larger units. Luby's cafeteria managers are given a high degree of autonomy. This has enabled them to cater to customer tastes in their local markets with specialized menu offerings. The majority of the food ingredients have been purchased locally by the individual cafeteria management team. This permitted managers to take advantage of price bargains in the local wholesale markets and to quickly respond to local product shortages. A few items such as fried haddock are carried by every cafeteria in the Luby's network. Ingredients for these signature items have been centrally sourced by the company. The management team of the individual cafeterias receive their compensation based on the financial performance of each cafeteria. The management team consisted of a manager, an associate manager and 2 to 3 assistant managers. Each team received 40% of the unit's operating profits. After the salaries of the assistant managers are deducted, the remainder in profits was divided in a 65-35% split between the manager and associate manager, respectively. The opportunity for autonomy and for attractive financial compensation has given Luby's managers a strong incentive to operate profitably for the long term. Approximately 85% of the company's unit managers have been with Luby's for 10 years or more. The year 1980 saw corporate revenues surpass the $100 million mark, and the company adopted a new name, Luby's Cafeterias Incorporated, on February 22, 1982. Luby's entered the financial big league when its stock began trading on the New York Stock Exchange under the LUB symbol, and since May 16, 1985, Luby's stock has been included in the Standard & Poor's 500 Composite Stock Price Index. The 1980s represented a period of expansion outside Texas, which was suffering from slumping oil prices. Luby's Texas cafeterias weathered the economic downturn by avoiding waste and cutting labor costs. While others in the restaurant industry expended millions of dollars on advertising and borrowed heavily, Luby's relied on word-of-mouth recommendations to build its customer base and internally generated profits to build new cafeterias. In a much-publicized incident, random and bizarre violence hit a Luby's restaurant in Killeen, Texas, on October 16, 1991. A lone gunman entered the restaurant filled with patrons and employees, shot and killed 23 people, wounded 25 more, and then turned the gun upon himself. When the killing ended, Luby's had acquired the unwanted distinction of being the site of the worst mass shooting in the history of America. The killer took his motive for the murders with him to the grave. When word of the massacre reached company headquarters in San Antonio, Luby's chairman and several senior executives immediately flew to Killeen to provide aid and comfort to the victims' families, the survivors, and to the community. In fact, Luby's management was praised for its sensible and sensitive handling of the crisis surrounding the shooting. When the Killeen Luby's reopened on March 12, 1992, hundreds of people, including some of the survivors, came to the cafeteria to eat freshly prepared jalapeno cornbread, pan-grilled catfish, and Jefferson Davis pie. The 1990s brought a more vibrant economy to the markets Luby's served and some new directions in its operations. In 1991, the company began developing a new marketing program using television and radio advertising in order to build repeat business and to position itself for youthful customers. Luby's TV ads cut the mustard. "Go heavy on the rye" was the double entendre headline over an article appearing in the December 5, 1994 issue of Nation's Restaurant News. The article noted Luby's ads used humor to convey the message that its restaurants catered to patrons of every age. Unlike the ads for other chains, Luby's did not merely feature glittery shots of the food in the cafeteria. During fiscal year ended August 31, 1994, Luby's conducted its first cooperative promotion, joining forces with Southwest Airlines, SeaWorld of Texas and Carina Hotels of Texas to target families with children. Favorable results from the advertising and promotional campaigns led Luby's to earmark 2% of sales for marketing efforts in fiscal 1996. At its January 1996 annual meeting, Luby's unveiled joint venture plans with Water Street Incorporated for 5 to 7 seafood restaurants over the next 5 years. Water Street's 5 restaurants in 3 cities serve moderately priced, Gulf of Mexico-style seafood. With a possible hint of a major new direction for the company as it moves toward the 21st century, Luby's chairman Ralph Pete Erbin told shareholders, "We will actively explore other potential concepts for diversification and enhancement of shareholder values." He said the company expected the joint venture to furnish Luby's with restaurant concepts that provide growth and profitability into the future. Restaurant management publications have also awarded Luby's with top honors. Restaurant Business profiled Luby's in a May 1989 article entitled Slow and Steady Wins. In 1996, for the sixth time in 7 annual surveys conducted nationally by Restaurant and Institutions magazine, consumers voted Luby's as their favorite in the cafeteria/buffet category. With firm roots in the local communities it served, Luby's cafeterias have been closely involved in local community events and philanthropic endeavors. When Hurricane Carla crashed into the Texas Gulf Coast in September 1961, the Corpus Christi Luby's served as an outpost for the National Guard and scores of emergency workers. Using gas-fired stoves, Luby's dispensed food and hot drink to police, guardsmen, and neighbors. "We didn't charge a thing, but we made a lot of friends," cafeteria manager Bill Lowe recalled. When the cafeteria reopened for normal business, Lowe remembered, "We were swamped with customers." In addition to such ad hoc measures, unit managers have been given a budget to spend on public service in their areas. The company's largest civic program is the Community Drug Education System. Initiated in 1987, the program has received a presidential citation for educating students, parents and teachers in 11 states about the dangers of substance abuse. By the end of fiscal 1996, Luby's had spent over $1.3 million on the program. In 2001, Chris and Harris Pappas of Houston's Pappas Restaurants joined the Luby's management team. 3 years later, Luby's moved its corporate headquarters from San Antonio to Houston. The addition of the Pappas management team saw several Luby's restaurants begin to transition from traditional cafeteria-style establishments to hybrid cafeteria/fine dining. Luby's celebrated its 60th anniversary in December 2006 with publishing Luby's Recipes and Memories, a collection of our favorite dishes and heartwarming stories. In 2008, Luby's published a special edition of the cookbook that included 12 additional recipes. In 2009, due to the economic recession, Luby's closed 25 stores and laid off staff as a cost-cutting measure. In 2010, Luby's Culinary Services introduced What's Brewing?, a coffeehouse concept store in downtown Houston. The same year, on June 18, Luby's announced it was buying Fuddruckers and Koo Koo Roo for $61 million after parent company Magic Brands LLC went bankrupt. On June 13, 2011, Luby's opened its first company-owned Fuddruckers restaurant in downtown Houston's tunnel system. In 2013, Luby's acquired Cheeseburger and Paradise. In August 2015, 93 Luby's were operating, and this declined to 78 in 2019. Technomic Consumer Insights senior manager Robert Burns stated that the fast casual restaurants reduced Luby's market share. During the 2020 COVID-19 lockdowns, Luby's Incorporated furloughed more than half of its corporate staff and cut the pay of remaining salaried employees by 50%. Luby's Incorporated also applied for and received a loan of $10 million as part of the Paycheck Protection Program. On June 3, 2020, Luby's board of directors announced plans to sell all its operating divisions and assets, including real estate assets. This decision was influenced in part by circumstances surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. Net proceeds from transactions were to benefit Luby's stockholders. The company did not have a definitive timeline for future transactions, but expected to eventually wind down remaining operations. On September 8, 2020, Luby's further announced it has adopted a plan to liquidate all of its existing assets, as opposed to operating in the current form or merely selling off divisions. As of September 11, 2020, 80 Luby's and Fuddruckers were still in operation. About 99% of Luby's stockholders voted for dissolution in November 2020. On June 21, 2021, Calvin Jin, founder of Flying Food Group, agreed to buy 32 Luby's locations for $28.7 million, a week after Nicholas Perkins of North Carolina agreed to buy Luby's Fuddruckers brand for $18.5 million. Prior to the announcement of Jin's acquisition, Luby's had planned to close all locations by August 2021.
This is what you'd cook if you had the time. But since you don't, you go to Luby's Cafeteria. Good food from good people. How do you make mouthwatering desserts like these? The same way you eat them. You take your own sweet time. Luby's Cafeteria. Good food from good people. Just because we cook everything here doesn't mean you have to eat it here. Take home a home-cooked meal from Luby's Cafeteria. Good food to go from good people.
If you have any fond memories, please indicate it at the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and like.